If you're going to be owned by, supported by, directed by, and managed by the community, then you need to give the community something back. I'm Joe Dawson, and most of my life is in some way connected to this hospital. I was born just a few weeks before the hospital opened, but my father was on the medical staff there. He was pretty familiar with the Maryville area. When I was at Maryville College, I started working here as an orderly. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I grew up. I was going to be going into the service. I started working here while I was waiting to go in the Navy. As I was working here at the hospital as an orderly, which was a male nursing assistant, I really got interested in working in the hospital. I liked the people, I liked what you did, I liked how they did it, and I wanted to be a part of that. Everybody kept talking about this fellow, J. Frank Meismer, who was about 6'6" and a big man, and he'd come walking down the hall and everybody just hid. I went to see him one day, and I said, just exactly what it is you do, because it seems to be kind of important. So he talked to me a good bit about what hospital administrators are, what they do, what all you had to do to become one. So I realized I had about 2 or 3 years of graduate programs to go through. So I went back and went on in the Army for 2 years. They made me a medic, so I was a medic in the Army for 2 years, and then came back out and went to graduate school at the Medical College of Virginia and got my master's degree in hospital and health administration. Before I got a call from J. Frank Meismer right out of the blue, offered me the job to come back home. My wife Sue and I weren't sure we wanted to come back home. We liked Richmond. She just finished graduate school. She's a speech pathologist. She'd gotten a job. I had a good job at a good hospital. I came back and visited Mr. Meismer and talked a while and finally decided I may not ever have another chance to come back home to Maryville, and I better take the chance while it's offered. And so we came back, and it's worked out pretty well over time. I've enjoyed being here and being able to do what I was able to do for this hospital over 25 years. There were several men in the community who decided that a hospital was needed here in Blount County. Most of health care at the time was provided in the homes. There were 2 houses that doctors used to put patients in that need to be watched and cared for. One was called Doctor's Hospital, that was owned by some of the doctors, and one was called Fort Craig Hospital. But there was not really a real hospital in the community. A.D. Huddleston was a public relations director for the Aluminum Company of America. And he was the man who really started and was the catalyst to get the hospital going. The story is told that he was hunting in the mountains one day with some friends near Metcalf Bottoms and came across a cemetery. And he was taken by the number of young children and infants, newborns in many cases, that had died. And he wondered, how did this happen? If we had good medical care, maybe this wouldn't happen. And he's the one that decided we need to get a hospital. It so happens that that's when the federal government was making money available to communities to upgrade facilities and organizations in the community that serve a public good. So they went about trying to get interest in the community for this hospital. I went to the county commission. The county commission appointed a committee to investigate building a hospital, and it turned out it was very much a community spirit to the beginning to this hospital. Maryville College gave some of the land that the hospital was built on. All the employees at the Aluminum Company of America gave a day's pay. Harrison's Construction Company's employees put in the sidewalks and the parking lots. The JCs and the JSETs helped move patients from the homes where patients were cared for. I've got a friend I was in high school with who was born at Doctor's Hospital the day that the move was taking place, and they put him in an egg carton and carried him over to the hospital. Very much the whole community was involved with raising the funds to match the federal funds to build a hospital and then to make it a reality. There were about 50 such hospitals in the state. Today there's only 3 left that started that way and are still that way. So we're kind of unique in the type of hospital we are. We grew, we added new technology, we became more competitive for the Knoxville hospitals. We were able to survive when 40-something hospitals in the state like us didn't and hadn't. And we're only been able to do that because of our bond with the community, to meet the community's needs, to do what we do well, and to be responsive to what the community needs in the way of health care. Blount Memorial Hospital was the first hospital in the whole Knoxville area to have a cardiac care unit that was specifically put in place to care for patients with cardiac problems. We had to have a better and bigger cardiac unit, which we did when we built the 1981 facility. We had now 5 cardiologists on the staff, all board certified.
I practiced cardiology here from 1992 until 2013. I started out as an engineer, and I got out and worked in the field for a while and decided I really liked God's engineering better, and so I got back in the medical field. So I went through 5.5 years at UT in Memphis, got a PhD in physiology, applied to medical school, and got into Johnson City's Quillen College of Medicine. Started in 1982, graduated in 86, went from there to Kentucky, at University of Kentucky for internship and residency in medicine. And then was really fortunate to get a cardiology fellowship in Georgia, Medical College of Georgia. Finished there in 92 and came here directly. The reason I started Blount Memorial is because I got a job offer from my former partners, Dr. Kiefer and Weatherby. Our group started in 1983 when Dr. Kiefer came here. And a year later, Dr. Weatherby joined him. And then when I came in 92, I actually replaced a fellow who decided he really would rather be in Knoxville. And so I started here in 92 and practiced 21 years. The hospital, to me, was basically the right size. The city was the right size, and the 2 guys I was working with were just, like I said, very welcoming. In fact, when I came down for my interview, I actually stayed at Dr. Weatherby's house. I got off from work at like 5 and drove from Georgia. Got in here about 1 o'clock in the morning. Didn't seem to faze him. Well, I chose cardiology in part because my father was a cardiologist in Memphis, and I had an introduction to it early on. And when I came out of engineering, you understand mechanics of flow and that sort of thing. And so choosing cardiology was partly because I had experience with pumps and pipes. We were one of the first hospitals in the country to actually do interventional cardiology, which is balloons to try to fix coronary lesions. We did that without surgery on site, and that was revolutionary back in the 90s. A lot of cardiologists coming out of training don't feel comfortable doing that. We did that for the whole time, most of the time I was here. When you're having an intervention done, and these are often in the middle of heart attacks, back when we were using just balloons to open arteries, if you had a failure, because those were not perfect, those balloons were just expanding in an artery, trying to push the lesion out of the way, and sometimes the vessel's very damaged, and it responds by closing off completely, which is something that we will often send them to emergency surgery for that, to get bypassed. So if you don't have a surgeon in-house, it's kind of scary. But we did okay with it. We had very few emergencies that went to Knoxville. But as I used to tell patients who were uncomfortable with it, if I was at one of the Knoxville hospitals and doing that procedure, and I needed an emergency surgery, a lot of times the surgery was full. They had somebody on the table. They couldn't take them. From here, I could get them to any one of 5 hospitals that had surgery with an open table, and I can get them to a table faster from here than I could sometimes in the hospital. While I was there, one of the biggest advancements was being able to use coronary stents. Instead of just using a balloon to push things out of the way, you put scaffolding into the vessel and expand that to hold the vessel open. And that also is much less risky than just using balloons. People have better success rates, and not just short term, but long term.
Family Birthing Center is another example of how we took a look at what the community needed and what we could do to help meet that need. We had a lot of people going to Knoxville to deliver their babies. And so we built a new, more modern family birthing center and recruited more pediatricians and more obstetricians so that we could offer comparable services that they could get in Knoxville.
My name is Dr. Elizabeth LeBrun, and I came to Blount Memorial Hospital in 1991. I started my medical training really as a nurse. I began as an associate's degree in a charter class in Hartford, Connecticut. I went to school there, and I didn't think at that time I wanted to be a doctor, but I was working with doctors, as nurses mostly do, and you don't know what a doctor does till you work with them. And when you work with them, you realize the only difference between them and you is a degree. So I went back and I got a bachelor's degree, and then I applied to medical schools and went to medical school in St. George's, Grenada in the West Indies. They couldn't guarantee me I could graduate and become a doctor in the United States. I could become a doctor in the United Kingdom or in Australia, and I thought, hey, I'm 20-something years old, that's okay. I'm not worried about that. I finished OBGYN with the University of Virginia in Charlottesville as a clinical professor. I decided I was going to look for private practice opportunities, and this was one of them that I looked at. In the end, that's what happened. I chose to come here out of all the different opportunities. And I have never once looked backwards in the rearview mirror or taken a step backwards and wondered, what if I went to here? Or what if I went to Florida? What if I went to Alaska? But I chose this place because of the hospital, the opportunity, and really most important, who was I going to serve when I got here? Over the years, I've worked in different opportunities here given by the hospital and leadership. First, I was the vice chief and then chief of the OBGYN department. And after finishing those opportunities, I decided to pursue medical leadership even further and became the vice chief of the staff of the hospital and the first female chief of the entire hospital. Well, after that, I wasn't through, because then I became chair of the credentials committee. Being an OBGYN doctor to begin with, which is how I started, we spent a lot of times on Sunday afternoon when everyone else is with their family, sitting around waiting for a baby to come out, waiting for the next emergency to happen, and of course it does. So then you have to mobilize. But in the meantime, that's where you get to know the doctors, get to know the nurses, they get to know the anesthesiologists, the emergency room people, is when you're all working together as a team.
I was the administrator about 4 years when I felt like we needed a foundation. We had people in the community and patients and families of patients who wanted to make donations to the hospital, but they couldn't make a charitable donation because we were governmental and we were not a 501c3. And we didn't want to change from what we were to a 501c3. So we established a foundation so that there was a separate organizational entity, and the foundation exists for the purpose of supporting patients and families at Blount Memorial Hospital. So that way we were able to not only allow people to make donations, but then start soliciting donations and support for the hospital's patients and their families. So the foundation is part of the hospital, but it's separately incorporated, has a separate board, has a separate purpose. But the purposes merge because these funds, the foundation, are able to receive and care for, go to help patients and families who need the help.
If you're sent home after any surgery and you're not told how to rehabilitate, it's a longer course and not as successful. We happen to have one of the greatest cardiac rehab programs in the area. So there's a copay usually with cardiac rehab, and sometimes that is a disqualifier for some patients that can't afford it. The hospital foundation has provided scholarships for those patients. I very much try to be aware of what's going on in my hospital. I still call it my hospital. And so I was asked to join the foundation board. A lot of physicians who are practicing don't know a lot about the foundation and what it does, including me. And so I learned a lot in the last 3-4 years. One of the requests we had from cardiology was for a Lucas vest, because it does chest compressions for you while you're attending to all the other things a patient needs in a code. So we were able to purchase one. They're using it already, as far as I know.
I started a nursing scholarship once I retired from Blount Memorial. I want to support the people on the battlefield, because the nurses, they really do matter. And if you don't have the staff to help take care of people, you don't have a hospital. The scholarship is administered through the Blount Memorial Foundation, and there is an application process. It's a once-a-year opportunity. If you had the scholarship awarded to you last year, you can reapply if you are still in a program. We want to afford the ones that we really think will make a big difference and that this will really help in their lives.
The basic function of the foundation is the most important. Gas cards to get somebody home or to and from follow-up appointments, oxygen for those that don't have it, clothes for those who lost theirs on the way in. Little things that a lot of us often take for granted. I think that's by far and above the most important thing the foundation does. Before I went to law school, I served in the fire service and emergency medical service over in Knoxville. And I continued doing that through college and through law school, and even then a little bit after. So I had been in that industry for a while. When I came to Maryville and started practicing law, it made sense. As I was looking for a place to serve with my time outside the office, the hospital foundation made a lot of sense. I get calls from time to time, as many of us in the community do, asking us to serve on this board or that board or serve any nonprofit in some capacity. I find that if you commit to a cause or something that your heart's not into, but you're just doing it just to kind of get some community service in, you're not going to give it the attention it deserves. But when Connie called and asked me to serve on the board for the hospital foundation, it was a pretty easy yes. We're excited about the new fundraisers. With both Pork and Cork and with Clay's for a Cause, we're reaching a new audience. People really got excited about that, and I think that was great. And just having something new that we can do to get out there and reach folks in the community has been really a breath of fresh air. It's been great. Our family has a lot of history here. I had a grandfather who was around when the hospital was first established. He was practicing medicine here. My uncle went on to practice medicine here. Both my grandfather and my uncle served as chiefs of staff at the hospital. My grandfather was a fairly stoic man, but every now and then he'd open up a little bit. He talked in later years about recruiting doctors here, and he would tell stories about bringing doctors to town and walking around downtown and seeing largely a farming community back then. And all these up-and-coming doctors saw a bunch of folks from the country walking around in overalls. And my grandfather talked about trying to make sure that he stressed to all these folks what an amazing community this is. We're small, it may not be the big city, but what you might give up in moving into a community like Blount County, you're going to get back so much more. He also talked about the hospital becoming what it is. It started pretty small, obviously, and he's not been around for a while to see where it is today, but he knew what this community could do. And I don't think it would surprise him at all to see how much the hospital's grown. And I think he'd be proud. I don't think I'm concerned about my legacy. I just want to make sure that while I'm here, I do everything I can to make sure that the foundation continues to grow and continues to support the projects that we support at the hospital, the folks that we assist. I just want to make sure that I leave it as capable, if not more capable, of continuing to do those things. I play a part, but it's a much bigger effort. This is nothing that one person can do. The staff here, I mean, they're the ones that are really making this thing go. I'm proud as a board member to be able to help them do what they do for the hospital and do what they do through this foundation.